Moving on to Dwight Howard, not a whole lot to say here, but what there is to say is that in this past week, Otis Smith took him off the trading block. He said, "We're not talking to teams anymore about trading Dwight Howard." Um, so that is what it is. Dwight Howard, however, has said, "Hell no! Of course you have to talk to teams because I don't want to be here." And because he's still technically Dwight Howard still stands that I have a trade request to the New Jersey Nets. That's still where Dwight Howard stands at this point. And the Nets still do have some pieces. At least they have a center in Brook Lopez, who I believe was an All-Star last year. He's a good center. At least they have some big man that they can ship over, and they've got the picks. So I can see it as a possibility, but I think, and you would probably agree with me, that Otis Smith still just wants to find a way to convince Howard to stay in Orlando.
I got to say, I can really appreciate his general management in that situation. Why would you ever get rid of the best big man in the league, a guy who, when you start to talk more about value of players, that's one of the things you, needless to say, have to take into consideration is the long term. This is still a guy that doesn't have a lot of miles on him. You got to figure he's good for another at least 5 or 6 very, very productive seasons. He's in the prime of his career.
At least.
I would not be looking to trade him for anything less than a really, really, really good package. The Lakers are still very much in play. I think that they maybe feel that, number one, they feel that Howard would be an upgrade over Gasol, and I think that they'd be willing to let he and Andrew Bynum go. But I don't know. Maybe we see a scenario where he moves at the trade deadline. But I can say this: I do think that he will eventually move, and I think that Otis Smith is doing a good job right now of not just acquiescing and giving in to the first request that's out there. You can't let him go for anything less than a very stellar package. And I think that if the Lakers want him, they'd have to be willing to part with Gasol and Bynum. And I think, as you talked about with the Nets, you'd be looking at a scenario where Brook Lopez and maybe some secondary players and draft picks leave, because that's really, sometimes you look at a guy like Howard and you say, what is the price on a player like that? And obviously it's as high as it gets.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. And I don't even think that that's enough. For me, Bynum and Gasol for Howard is crap. I'm sorry, but I'm kind of over Pau Gasol, which I know a lot of people aren't, but I don't buy him anymore. I don't think he's a top 5 center in the NBA. Well, I don't know. That's debatable. There aren't a lot of guys, but he's a finesse type player too. Dwight Howard is a complete player. If he could just get that post game going and start shooting free throws. Start shooting them, making them go in. He gets to the free throw line a ton. But when they only go in 40% of the time. I don't know. I think he's going to be on the Nets. I might rather have Brook Lopez. I don't really know. Bynum is just trouble. Do you want Bynum on your team? I mean, he's fantastic, but he's such a mess. I feel like he's such an off-the-court problem for you, right? And on-the-court problem in the playoffs.
I'm real interested to see how he responds this season. I mean, this is a situation where, as we talked about last week, he ended last season about as poorly as you could, both with the attitude and not producing as much in that series and against Dallas. How does he respond this year? And I don't think anyone knows the answer to that right now. We can all speculate and think, maybe he takes a step up this year. Maybe he doesn't. And I think that there's a great unknown with him. And as you talked about, I think you'd have to err more on the side of him, maybe not going a notch above where he was at last year, because the attitude has been an issue. So that is something of an unknown with him. The bottom line is that it just does seem that throughout the history of the NBA, when you look at big trades, if you're going to deal with someone like Dwight Howard, generally speaking, you're not going to get back in return the same type of value that you're giving up. And so like I said, I don't blame Otis Smith for waiting.
Yeah, but at a certain point, he's going to have to move, because Dwight Howard's going to move on next year, and they can't give him up for nothing.
You have to get something.
And just one small piece again about Bynum, and again, we'll get to the Lakers later in a more complete way, but when we're talking about Bynum, the other thing we have to remember is I don't think he's a very attractive trade piece, not just for the reasons I said before about his attitude, but also because this dude never plays a full season. I mean, he's extremely fragile, extremely injury prone. He's rarely on the court, he's playing, 60, 70 games a season, and hopefully he'll show up for you in the playoffs. A couple years ago he didn't, so I don't know. I don't think he's a very attractive piece there for them, but Orlando would have to beg for him in a deal with the Lakers. If that Lakers deal was going to go down, Bynum comes. That's just kind of how it rolls, so we'll see what happens.